You are now watching KITV.
Or talk to you about, sometimes we call it ambience, sometimes we call it climate, others call it atmosphere. I want to talk to you about the great issue of mood. Picture with me this scene this morning, or today, or whenever you're watching this. You're grocery shopping and you're down maybe the international aisle in Superstore or Safeway or one of your local grocery stores, wherever you are. You travel to the sounds of classical music or any music that's playing in the store. You're in your favorite restaurant, the lights are low, the corner table is yours, as a violinist serenades you during your meal. It's your anniversary and you actually remembered the right date, even got your wife flowers and maybe a box of chocolates. You woke up with a headache, the kids are screaming, school's out, and they're bored at home. The telephone just rang for the 5th time, and the pot roast burnt. You just sat down to do your budget. Your monthly income was up this month, almost $1,500 this month. Then the total for the bills was, $1,750 for the same period. The next morning, the pastor preaches on tithing. You just discovered you are the winner of a $10,000 sweepstake. And that afternoon in the mail, you receive a letter from the CRA stating that a serious error has been found on the previous tax reforms, and the government owes you $5,000. Then your husband comes home and announces he just got a raise and a promotion. The kids bring their reports cards home and they both have straight A's, and the comments at the bottom says model children. Moods obviously affect to a great deal our behavior and our persistence in setting out to do something or not to do something. So it's important how we look at things in life, not just what we do with things, as we covered in the last lesson about things. Never let things become the all and all. Never let things become more valuable than people. Let me propose quickly. The Bible teaches us to guard our hearts and our minds and to set out to deliberately fix our moods or attitudes towards Christ and to stick to our faith. Christianity doesn't just happen to us. We are active participants in the process and we deeply affect the process. Let me read verse 1 through 3 of Hebrews chapter 12. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience that race that is set before us. Verse 2, looking unto Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. That's powerful place to start. Today I want to cover a couple of points with you on the lesson of the great issue of mood. We've always heard of people using this term mood swings, and oftentimes when we talk about mood swings, reference is made to our female partners about mood swings. But guess what? Moods affect all of us, like money affected all of us in our last lesson. So stubbornness, verses 1 through 3, is what is covered here. Stubbornness is a mood. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 here is talking about history. Wherefore seeing we also. It's talking about all those who have gone before us, that came before us. They're the cloud of witnesses now who are in heaven, over, looking over the balcony of heaven, looking down upon us. It says we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. The Greek word for literally means the testifiers, those who testify, right? Now, the Greek word for witness often is misinterpreted. It comes from the word marturos, which means to, or the English word marturum means martyr. It brings us to the word martyr. So these great testifiers, right? We're surrounded by these great testifiers, and these testifiers are martyrs. They are the ones who've been martyred for their faith. The biblical concept of martyr has changed over the years. It didn't mean then one who died for their faith, but one who testified about their faith, whether they lived or died. Now we know that in one of the major religions of the world, there's a lot that is spoken about martyrs. A lot of these young men are indoctrinated to become martyrs for their helpless, hopeless cause, their hateful cause, their wicked, evil cause. But from a biblical perspective, when we look at verse 1 of chapter 12, the whole context here is to be understood from this perspective, that they did not use it in the sense of martyr, because it's changed as we understand martyr today, but one who testified about their faith, whether they lived or died. We're not alone in the struggle of faith. Next time you feel lonely, think of yourself within a huge stadium surrounded by all the believers who have died in faith, and they are cheering you on. This is what this looks like. Struggling is not your thing. It has been every believer's experience. You're not alone. Others have struggled and survived, or others have conquered, and so can we. Let me continue. If we allow ourselves to sit in self-pity and get moody, we might be tempted to quit, or we might move on into depression, or we might get stuck in a cloud of heaviness. The second thing here, second part of verse 12, it talks about hindrances. Yeah, we are told what to do when such times come. Throw off every heavy thing. Throw everything that hinders our progress. This is an active process on our part. It's an action word. It is a verb. It's not a passive word. It is an action word. We are to throw off. That speaks about a lot of work that we are to do, exercise some personal responsibility, and to throw off any sin that so easily entangles us. This is not just sins the writer is referring to sins. There can be other things that can hinder us, such as improper perspective and improper moods. Anything that gets in the way of our making progress spiritually, we are to throw these things off. We are to cast these things off that easily entangle us. Since the analogy of the text refers to runners in the stadium games, the image is important. A good runner knows that the less stuff you carry, the longer you will be able to run. Any runner will tell you. In training, maybe they might have some stuff on their back in training, but when they're running for the prize, when they're running for the 50-meter dash or the 100-meter sprint, they are not carrying anything. They want to be as light as possible to be able to get to the finish line before anybody else. Excess baggage will always wear us out. Nobody runs with the idea that they will quit before the finish line. Everybody is running to get to the finish line. Nobody runs with the idea that they want to stop halfway. Pacing ourselves is critical in a running race also. Don't run too fast at first because you can feel you can whip the world. You'll need the stamina later. And if you watch any committed runner or athlete in running, in races, you'll know that they set paces. And even in the long distance running, the officials and those that set up these runners, they actually set pace setters in the race, like the marathons and half marathons, 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, all those kind of long distance. They have pace setters who go in there and set the pace. Denial can be our worst enemies at this stage. We have a tendency to deny things that can hinder our efforts. Let me give you an illustration. The old desert nomad who awakened hungry in the middle of the night, he lit a candle and began eating dates from a bowl near his bed. He took a bite from the first one and noticed a worm in it. He tried a second one, and again a worm, and the third and the fourth. Still he found worms in them. Finally he came upon a solution. He would blow the light out and eat them in the dark, and he wouldn't know, and so he ate them all in the dark, and he didn't bother. Because when you put light on the situation, you're going to know that there's worms. Switch the light off, you're just going to eat the dates. So denial doesn't solve our problems. Denial actually veils our problem. It actually masks our problem. It hides the temporary situation or the temporary circumstances. But like I said earlier about stubbornness, there are too many of us who are headstrong, according to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. The Bible says here, we must run with perseverance. There's no other way to run this Christian race than to run with perseverance. You don't enter a race just to run only as far as you like running. Nobody will sponsor you. Nobody will work with you if that's all you want to do. You must overcome that mood. You must overcome that mindset. Or at least you must take charge over it. You must master that mindset. Notice to the end of this verse, he calls the race marked out for us. For every one of us, individuals, different personalities, different makeup, all of us have a race marked out for us. In other words, we don't always get to choose the race. Like today in athletics, you can get the 100-meter guys, they will choose not to run in the 1,000-meter, or they won't run in the 5,000-meter. No, in this race that the Bible is talking about here, we don't often get to choose the race that we want to run in. God prepares a race for you, and you and I have to have the proper strategy to finish the race. We just follow what the Lord. Shortcuts will only disqualify us. Like in any athletic event, especially in the racing, if you have a false start, you can get kicked out of the race. One illustration for us: several years ago, a woman in the Boston Marathon was disqualified because it was discovered later that she had taken some shortcuts. When she thought no one had been looking, she thought she could win on her own way. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2, the Bible says here, fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher. We've got to fix our eyes. A good runner doesn't allow himself to look at where the other runners are in relationship to where him or herself is. They fix their eyes forward. They're not paying any attention to what's going on the side. They're putting all their resources, they're mustering all their energy, all their athletic training. They're summoning it. They're pulling it forward as they run forward. One of the stories that was captured in the Olympics, the guy out front coming to the finish line was so confident of his victory that he decided it would be completely safe to turn his head to see where the next guy was. He did, and as he did that, he lost pace, and the guy just behind him soon passed him as they hit the line, and the photo finish showed that the guy that was behind him cleared him by a head. Broken concentration can be costly to a runner. Broken concentration for us, when we get out of focus, when we get off focus, when we take our eyes off Jesus, can get us into serious trouble. It can be costly. Many runners will mark out a single item down the track and keep their eyes completely set on that mark as a focal point. And so should we too, as believers. We ought to just fix our eyes on Jesus and set that as the goal, and don't look left or right, but just keep our eyes. Jesus should be the only object we focus on for setting our own pace and goals, not on other runners. There's no denial in the text that running will be with pain. In fact, since Jesus is referred to it, clearly states that Jesus ran with joy, knowing that the suffering and the shame of the cross would bring great honors later. The Bible says that who for the joy that was set before him, he came and endured. He focused on the joy that would be at the end. And often runners will focus on that rather than the pain they feel immediately or temporarily. It's when they get that trophy, when they cross that line, when they break that ribbon, that joy, that elation is what they focus on. The statement that Jesus endured with joy helped establish Jesus' mood during his suffering. It is not the absence of pain that is the Christian's goal. It is the reward in spite of the pain. That's what we should be focusing on. Yeah, sure, we are faced with trials on every side. Sure, we are faced with testings. Sure, we are faced with trouble. But we ought to focus on all the joy that is set before us. These things that come now are nothing, the Bible says in Romans, in comparison to the joy that is awaiting us. One of the greatest men of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, all the British people would know this, was asked to give his final speech near the end of his life in 1955. In great pain, he was helped to the podium, where he stood up for a very long time with his head hung low in weakness, barely standing. He finally raised his head and delivered his final message to the world. He said, "Never give up, never give up, never give up." Then he sat down 3 times. That's all was his speech. Victory comes to the persistent. Victory does not come to those who are static. Victory comes to us who are consistent. I would not be where I am today in ministry had I taken a side track, or had I tried to do a shortcut, or had I tried to do a false start. I am where I am, and the ministry is where it is today because I've been persistent. When the easiest road for me was to turn around and walk out, or to run and leave this place, I was persistent. Sometimes people think the road of least resistance is the best road. But I want to say the best road is, for victory this is to be persistent. Not to the quitters or to those who mope. Quitters never win, and winners never quit. Verse 3 is really acknowledging the fact that there will be those times when we will all feel weary and we will all feel like quitting. But you cannot quit. You got to stay the course. If you're involved in something as a ministry in the church, stick with it. Don't step down because temporary circumstances are prevailing upon you. If you're involved in a relationship that there are temporary circumstances that are prevailing, stick with it. Don't give up. Don't quit. What we are to do is look to Jesus. He didn't quit or give up or lose heart because he kept the long-range victory in focus during his suffering. He thought of me, thought of you. One writer says he could have called 10,000 angels, but he thought of you and thought of me. This is what we must do when we are confused and we feel God doesn't care or love us. If we can't handle the present, then simply think about the future. When the present seems overwhelming, when the present seems to be just so painful, we ought to think about the future. Get your mind off the temporary circumstances and set your mind on something down the road. Secondly, verses 12 and 13 of chapter 12 of Hebrews roads, the smoothing the road. There's hope. Let me read verse 12 for us, and then I'll come back here. It says, wherefore lift up the hands which hang down and feeble knees, and make straight the paths for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out the way, but let it rather be healed. I want you to notice the active nature of the commands here. Strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. It doesn't say send the prayer and intercession team to strengthen your arms. It doesn't say send the prayer team or the pastors or the evangelists or the prophets. It says you strengthen your arms. You strengthen your weak knees. Certainly our flesh is weak. The Bible tells us the flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. And even our spirit is not always on top. We cannot just sit around waiting to be zapped. Too often we get into these Christian zones where we're expecting something like a Star Wars thing to happen. We're just going to get a zap, and we're going to be filled with new excitement and new fervor. But no, we need to stand, and having done all, we must stand. Inherent in this statement is the note of responsibility on our part to search out a way to strengthen our weak hands and our feeble knees. Since we are commanded to do so, this is not a suggestion, we are commanded to do so. It must be possible. If God is saying we must do this as a command, if He's commanding us to do, I think God knows that we are capable. We have the capability to do this. God doesn't ask us to do what we can't do, at least without His help. So the note of hope here is found within the statement. It is possible to have our feeble arms strengthened. It is possible to have our weak knees made strong. You do note, however, that we are asked to do this, meaning that the responsibility is on us to get strong. Pacing oneself, I said, is critical. Yes? Pacing oneself is critical in a running. If you run too fast, you can end up with all kinds of problems. Keeping the runner's analogy here, that we find in chapter 12, at the start of the chapter, will help us to define how do we really strengthen our arms? How are we able to, strengthen these feeble? Here's a couple of suggestions. I enrolled in the gym just last year, towards the end of last year. The way we do it is regular exercise. And any athlete will tell you the best course of action, the best road to success and victory, practice, practice, practice. Studying the route until it is well memorized. Listen to the coach. Even the knowledge that a host of other runners have made it already should be encouraging to us. This cloud of witnesses who await us, who are standing in the balconies of glory, that's encouraging for us. The race we are called to run is not an ordinary race. It is not optional. It is mandatory. There is no optional race we are called to run. One way to strengthen ourselves is by simply realizing how important this race is, more so than any other race. Maybe feel like you're called to the race of financial wealth, or you're called to the race of physical prowess, or whatever race you feel you're called to. Let me say, this is the most important race. This race that you're called to. No race is more important than the one we are in for Christ. Healing. Verse 13 talks about healing here. Verse 13 says, and make straight the paths for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out the way, but let it rather be healed. Make level paths for your feet, it says. The quality of the path we follow is partly our responsibility. The path is partly our responsibility. We can help keep that path clear, or let it get cluttered and increase the change of tripping. Growing up, I grew up in a place I grew up in a place where, it was not developed at the time. It was all bush, and as a result, I would come home many days with lots of scratches and lots of thorns I'd have to dig out of my feet because we never kept the paths clear. And then the bush would just take back the walkways that we had made. So you got to take responsibility for that. Many runners will take a course through its entirety to get the sense of what the course is like and to check it out for any pits, holes, or bumps, even to clear the debris if necessary before they run. It is obviously easier to run on steady, even ground than it is to run on, ground that is twisty and windy and not level. 1 minute up, little pothole there, and then a hill. So it's important to check out the course and make necessary corrections. Oftentimes we need to take stock of just what it will take to get to the finish line. Number 3, in closing, it says here that verse 18 through 24, go with me to verse 18. It says, "For you not come unto the mount that might be touched, that burned with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of the words, which voice they that heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them anymore." They got really frightened when they heard the voice of God that thundered like many waters. So before Christ died on the cross, believers had a very heavy course to follow. Constant sacrifices of blood. We just come through a season of Passover, and we're reminded of the Passover in Genesis 12, and we realize how many animals had to be killed constantly to renew faith in God or right standing with God. Lots of blood had to be spilled. The laws that had little room for error in them. Fear was the main cause of faith back then. A lot of people served out of fear and trepidation and not out of relationship of love. God was distant in terms of fellowship, and he spoke through many thunders and spoke through many other people. There was much one had to do just to approach God. Hours of preparation were required. And under the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, the weight of their sins weighed in on them before a holy God. An approach was careful and very specific in nature, and it had to be timely also.